And then, without further ado, it is my pleasure to present Lisa Herrera, who's going to be talking about Step 1, assessment, Step 2, evaluation. On this slide, you can read a bit about Lisa. So Lisa's taught LINC for about 15 years, and she's currently a Lead Instructional Coordinator. She's also a CLB Team Lead for BC and a PBLA Regional Coach for the National Implementation of PBLA. She's finishing her master's degree in Education Administration and Leadership at UBC. And with that, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
This presentation is not referenced only to the LINC program, which is the program that I've worked in for the past 22 years, but is rather about the ideas of language assessment and evaluation in general. So this is where I think we actually left off last time, which is I was asking for you to use the hands up button and to tell me how many of you attending this presentation work in a LINC context. Aha! So I see quite a few hands going up. I just want to see how many, because there's quite a few of you in this presentation, so I'm just curious. I'm scrolling down right now to see how many of you are in a LINC context. Okay, I see hand after hand after hand after hand going up. So why don't we stop and everyone please put your hands down. And if you can tell me, is there anybody here who teaches mainly international students, so in an international context? Put your hands up for that. Okay, so I see some hands up. I'm not sure if these are still the LINC people or if these are the international context. So I'm just going to pause for a second. And everyone whose hands up is right now should be teaching in an international context. Okay, fantastic. And then hands down, everybody. And if you can tell me, is there anybody here in the room that is teaching in an academic setting, such as college or university? Okay, so I've got a couple of people, not too many. Looks like most people here are probably from the LINC context. Is there anybody here that is in the K-12 system? Okay, so there's still a couple of hands up. So perhaps some of these people might be crossing over into different systems as well. Okay. Well, for those of you who are here from the LINC context, which looks like it's most of you, some of you will know me from one of the other hats that I wear, which was mentioned in the introduction. But I'd like to clarify today that I'm not actually presenting in any of my official capacities in this presentation. So this presentation is not from the perspective of any particular organization. So instead, I'm basing this presentation on some research that I personally have recently conducted into the concept of evaluation. And I provided a list of references at the end of the presentation and also in the Realize forum so that you can read the sources if you'd like. Okay, so in this presentation today, the first and major thing I'd like to do is establish a definition of evaluation as distinct from the idea of assessment. Once we're all on the same page with the concept of evaluation, I'd like to talk about what factors can be considered during an evaluation, depending on the goal of evaluation in your context, so whether it's LINC or international or academic. And finally, I will spend some time on the weighting of factors in evaluation. And so for those of you who are in LINC, if any of you are here from the point of view of PBLA, I'd like to make it really clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of PBLA right now, so I'm not going to give you a specific procedure for evaluating student portfolios in this presentation. The PBLA leads are actually talking about this idea, and they will be issuing an update to lead teachers on the subject. So what I'm doing here is trying to lay some groundwork on the concept of evaluation that I hope we can use in any language program. Now, I've built in some interaction during this presentation, as well as some places where I'm going to ask you to respond to specific questions. But I'd like to ask you to hold your general questions until the end so that I can focus on them and try to answer them. And I'm also hoping that there will be some time for us to have a little bit of discussion on this topic through the chat box, which I haven't tried before, so I'm not quite sure if that will work or how it will work. But I'm hoping that we will be able to do this because I think it's something that I'd like to hear ideas from people in the room. I think there's probably some great ideas. Okay, so let's jump right in with defining evaluation. So what I'd like everyone to do right now is to have a look at different uses of the term evaluation that I have encountered. So I'm actually going to be quiet for a moment, so it's not the audio dropping out. I'm going to be quiet for a moment to give you a chance to read the choices on the slide. Okay, so now, can everybody hear me? I'm back. You can use hands up to tell me if you can hear me. Okay, I see people saying yes, so I think we're okay. All right, what I'd like to do is I'd like you to tell me which of these ideas most describes your idea of evaluation. So now what I'd like you to do is type a number into the chat box for the statement that best describes your idea of evaluation. So if you think of evaluation as a process of testing or assessing, type the number 1 in the chat box. If you think of evaluation is more about interpreting the results of tests or assessments, type the number 2. If you think that evaluation is more generally about measuring worth, type number 3, and so on. So I'm seeing a few numbers come up. I've got some 6s, some 4s, 6, 6, 6. Okay, 2, 4. So there's quite a few 6s coming up, and I see some people are putting in more than one number. So 1 and 6, 4 and 6, 1, 4, 5 and 6, but a lot of 6s. I see quite a lot of 6s coming up. Yeah. Okay. So let me say here that there really are no wrong answers here. These are all acceptable definitions of evaluation that I found in the literature. But I think you can see how the subject of evaluation can be confusing for a lot of people. For example, when I was looking for resources on this, the terms assessment and evaluation seem to be linked together into one big process, particularly in the public school system resources. So they were thinking of assessment and evaluation as all of the, or they were thinking of evaluation as all of the definitions on this slide together, as in assessment and evaluation of students' work. So, however, I have found that even without a really clear definition of terms, many instructors, such as those in the 2007 study ESL, EFL instructors' beliefs about assessment and evaluation, sense that evaluation is actually a different process than the process of assessment, and one that they need more understanding of in order to implement. So this is something that I would agree about, that evaluation as a process is different than assessment as a process, and that teachers need some guidance in performing evaluation if it is to yield useful and consistent results across classes and programs. So after consulting many articles, texts, and teacher websites, including to a large degree the book Language Assessment Principles and Classroom Practices by Brown and Abewick-Rama. And if the webcam was on, I have the book here and I was going to hold it up and show it to you. But anyway, that's one of the main books that I looked at. So after looking at articles, texts, and that textbook and teacher websites, what I conclude is that if we want to clearly separate the processes so that we can focus on doing each of them well, in general, we can say that evaluation is about judgment or making decisions, while assessment is mainly about measurement. So put another way, assessment is gathering data or evidence, and evaluation is interpreting and weighing the data or evidence to come to a conclusion. So this is the definition of evaluation that I'm going to use for the rest of this presentation. Evaluation is weighing data about student performance to come to a conclusion, meaning that at least for this presentation, I'm separating evaluation as a process from assessment as a process. And at this point, let me also clarify that when I'm speaking of evaluation in the rest of this presentation, I'm using a capital E. So you'll have to hear that in my voice. I'm referring to the evaluation period that needs to happen at the end of a term or reporting period, when decisions need to be made about what students have accomplished. So, for example, in the LINC context, I'm talking about the time when you're deciding where the students are at with completing the CLB level in a skill. In an international context, it might be deciding if students have learned the grammar and the functions that they've been studying. In an academic context, it might be whether students can understand complex readings and write an academic paper. But in all cases, it's the big decision-making time for teachers. So pass or fail, whether the student gets an A or a C or an F, whether they move up to the next level or stay in the level that they're in for a while longer. So however your school or your organization goes about reporting that, what I'm talking about now is capital E evaluation. So I'm making this distinction right now because I'm sure that some of you are thinking that drawing conclusions about whether students are successful in a particular assessment task or on a particular essay, for example, are also evaluation by my definition. And that's true. But in that case, that would be evaluation with a small e and focusing on specific criteria rather than on the factors to be considered in the capital E evaluation period that I'm going to talk about in the rest of the presentation. So just to check in, is everyone with me on this? Can you put your hands up if it makes sense to you that this presentation is now examining capital E evaluation that happens when a decision has to be made about what a student has achieved? Okay, so I'm seeing lots and lots of hands going up. Yeah, as I scroll down, I see most of the hands going up. Okay. Okay, so now that we agree on a definition of evaluation that's clear and I hope simple, let's move on to factors to be considered in evaluation by first saying that the process of evaluation in terms of making decisions about students' achievements and abilities is not simple. It is not, for example, a process of just adding up. It's not about taking all the percentages on tests or numerically scored assessments and doing a calculation to come up with a final number. Rather, evaluation is a complex process involving mostly objective evidence-based measures, but also some subjective experience-based measures. So as Brown and Abewick-Rama put it, you evaluate when you value the results. So evaluation is about deciding the meaning of the data you've gathered about students' achievements and abilities. Okay, so now let's look at some of the factors that can be considered in the evaluation of students' language achievements or abilities. Were any of you able to have a look at the handout that I uploaded to the Realize presentation forum? Can you just put your hands up if you looked at the handout or if actually you downloaded it, printed it out? Oh, wow. Lots of hands up. Boy, you guys are good. Good students. Just want to see how many of you. Oh, yeah, there's quite a few of you that got it. That's great. Okay, it's fine if you didn't look at it previously because the information is actually here on this slide. So this is an exercise that I took from the Brown and Abewick-Rama text on page 320, and I adapted it slightly by grouping a couple of the categories that were used in the text. So I'd like you to do a few things with this. The first is to please have a look at the factors on this slide that might be considered for capital E evaluation of students' language achievements or ability at the end of a reporting period or when a decision has to be made. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment, so it's not my audio dropping out. I'll just be quiet for a moment while everyone has a chance to look at these different factors and think about them. Okay, so first of all, does anyone have any questions about any of these factors? Is everyone clear on what each of them represent? So if it's
Lisa, I can't hear you again. Am I correct? No, but yes, the audio is gone again. Lisa, do you want to try to call in with the audio?
But we're back. Is that correct? Yes, people can hear me. Fantastic. Okay, so I think where we were is I was asking if anyone had any questions about any of these factors. Is it all clear on what they represent? So I see Catherine Rockwell says, I'm reluctant to include punctuality and attendance as many students have real demands on their time. I see Joan said, what about the holistic evaluation? Joan Porter. Are there any other questions about these factors? Okay, Shauna says, clear what they represent, but a lot of the factors are not necessarily fair to be included in an evaluation. Okay. Okay, so that's great. That's actually leading us into the next part, which is I want you to just decide two things. So these are factors that could be included. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to tell me which factors you think should be included in evaluation, and also how much each factor that you think should be included should be counted for. So what I'd like you to do, and this is what's on the handout if you had a chance to look at it, but if you can type into the chat box now the letters that represent the factors that so no one do that yet until I finish the instructions. If you can type into the chat box the letters that represent the factors that you think should be included. So you might think only A and B, or you might think A, B, C, and D, whichever ones you think should be included. And then beside each letter, can you type a percent? So if you think A should be 50% and B should be 50%, you can type A 50%, B 50%. Or if you think A should be 70% and D 10% and E 20%, you can type that. Please make sure that it all adds up to 100%. So please right now, type into the chat box the letter and the percent that you think it should be considered in evaluation. Okay, so I've got Ryan Drew, who's got A 85, B 10, and C 5. And I've got Janice, who's got B 50%, but didn't tell me what the other 50% would be. And then Shauna's got A 25, B 50, and participation 25. Okay, I see Janice Janice is typing them in one at a time. Okay, so I've got Todd, who's got A and B 50-50, and Katie, who's got A 60, B 30, and C 10. Okay, and now they're all scrolling up quite quickly, so it's hard for me to catch them all. Okay, and I've got Louise Green for credit students, 80%, A 80%, B 10%, others 10% for motivational reasons. Okay. So while everyone is continuing to think and type, let me point out that the first two factors involve demonstrated and largely documented performance of language ability, while the last two in particular, are not language ability, but rather learning ability and habits, and can be colored by a student's personality and his or her circumstance, which I think, I can't remember who it was at the beginning, but one of our participants actually said that. So for example, a student might be the type who takes longer to process things, and so makes progress slowly. So if you're looking at student improvement over the term, that might be a factor. A student might want to learn, but not have time to do homework due to employment conditions. Childcare issues can have an impact on attendance and punctuality, and so on. Okay. So obviously what you were doing in this last activity is thinking about explicitly what to include and what to exclude as part of evaluation, as well as the weighting each factor should have. And you can see that there is actually quite a range in what factors that people believe should be considered, as well as how much each factor should be considered. So if you look at this chat box and you see the range of what people are putting in, there's no clear answer as to what should be considered and how much it should be considered. So I'm guessing that some of you might be thinking at this moment, well, this is why we're attending this presentation. We want you to tell us, what do we include and how much do we weight the factors? So at this point in the presentation, it would be really nice if I could give you a simple, clear-cut answer. But remember, I said that evaluation is complex. So I'm not trying to be coy or evasive, but the answer to what exactly to include and how much does depend upon the specific context you're teaching in and the goal of your evaluation. So that's the reason I was asking at the beginning about what different contexts that you were teaching in, because that will impact what you need to do for evaluation. So some programs might have requirements about attendance and participation. For example, they might want to know that students have covered certain topics and have learned enough to contribute to the class on those topics. So in that case, the conclusion that you come to has to include a weighting for those two factors. And other programs might insist that only formal assessments can be counted in evaluation rather than including observations. And furthermore, some programs, and particularly academic programs in my experience, expect a certain pass or promotion rate in a class. And in that case, students are often measured against each other as in a bell curve, with the top 10% of students being given the top grade and the bottom 10% failing. And other programs have particular outcomes that students have to meet, and that's what students are measured against to draw conclusions. So it's really impossible to provide one answer because the particular teaching context has to be taken into account. But I do think what it all comes down to when you are deciding what to include and exclude and the weighting of each factor is, what do you want the evaluation to mean? So here I will say something definitive, and that is, if the program is not specifically dictating the factors and the weighting of the factors, and a teacher does have control over these, I would suggest adhering in a large way to the advice from Norman Gronlund, who's an educational assessment specialist, and this advice was found in the Brown and Abe-Wickrama text. So Gronlund said, and I'm quoting here, "Base grades on student achievement and student achievement only. Grades should represent the extent to which the intended learning outcomes were achieved by the student. They should not be contaminated by student effort, tardiness, misbehavior, and other extraneous factors. If they are permitted to become part of the grade, the meaning of the grade as an indicator of achievement is lost." So I'm going to read that again with the word evaluation, substituting for grades, since not all of us use grades in our language programs. So base evaluation on student achievement and student achievement only. Evaluation should represent the extent to which the intended learning outcomes were achieved by the student. They should not be contaminated by student effort, tardiness, misbehavior, and other extraneous factors. If they are permitted to become part of the evaluation, the meaning of the evaluation as an indicator of achievement is lost. Now, so I have a question. Who is this quote from again? So the quote is from an education assessment specialist named Norman Gronlund, and the quote is found in the Brown and Abe-Wickrama text. Okay. Now, I'm going to go on right away to say that Brown and Abe-Wickrama are softer than Gronlund in their own recommendation of what to include. So rather than completely excluding what they call the fuzzy factors, which are factors such as effort and improvement, they suggest giving them only a very small weight, no more than 5 to 10%. And they were actually talking about that in the context of the difference between a grade. So for instance, it might be the difference between someone getting a B and someone getting an A, or someone getting a C and someone getting a B. Those, what they call fuzzy factors, such as effort and improvement, could make a difference between those things. Okay? And to me, I have to say, it makes sense that especially if the program has a standard to measure against, such as the LINC program does with the CLB standard, and that's of course the program that I'm most familiar with, it makes sense to me that if their program has a standard, that the evaluations should focus on the student's achievement of the standard. So we've all known classes where the teacher is a hard marker and an A in that teacher's class is like a B in that teacher's class is like an A in another teacher's class. And we've also known classes where the only thing you have to do to pass is show up. So by focusing on achievement of a standard, regardless of how many days the student managed to attend or other fuzzy factors, you are primarily considering if his or her performance demonstrates that he or she can do the tasks according to the level. Whether those tasks are CLB tasks, whether they're writing essays, or whether they're demonstrating a level of knowledge of grammar. So to me, this means that the mark or the conclusion needs no further explanation and can mean the same thing to students, to teachers, and to anyone outside the program. And thank you, Shauna, for putting in the name of that book. Okay, so what I'd love to do next is talk about applying these findings in a specific situation. But as we've already established, as each situation is unique and in some cases very complex, that's where I'm actually going to leave things right now. So hopefully I've laid a foundation for further discussion with the things that I've covered today. And I can see lots of really interesting ideas sort of flying by me in the chat box that I'm not really having a chance to take in. It would be really nice if we can have a bit of a discussion now through the chat box if that's going to work. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that. Before we do that, I just want to quickly flip to the references that I did use. And there at the top is that Brown and Abewikrama text. That's one of the main references, but I did look at quite a number of other references. And so now what I'd like to do is bring it back to questions and comments. And if we are able to have a little chat, that would be really great. I'm wondering if I can just take a moment and see if I can catch a couple of the comments here to sort of start us off. So D Story said, absolutely it can be positive, just doesn't take into account various learning styles, home responsibilities, etc. I'm wondering, D Story, could you explain what you mean by that? If D Story is still in the room with us? Okay. While I'm waiting for that, I see that Kelly Logan says, how do we reduce the subjectivity and inconsistency in evaluation? So I think my answer to that is, again, to focus on mostly on A and B in the evaluation, so focusing on the standard. And I note that you didn't go into formative and summative. That was Yvonne, and that was intentional. Formative and summative actually are sort of grouped into that first category of language performance formally demonstrated on assessments. And again, I think that would have to be something that a specific program would have to say. Some programs would say that only the summative assessments are the ones that would be counted, whereas other programs might want to take into account the formative. If you're separating them in that way, of course, in PBLA, all assessments are formative, so you can't really make that distinction. And D Story, it was in reference to a requirement for a certain number of hours using an online program. Okay. Okay. And then Sherry Rhodes comments that well-designed rubrics or testing tools help remove that subjectivity. Yes, especially if they are aligned to the standard, right? So if you do have a standard, as in LINC, we have the CLB standard, I would agree that if your testing tools are really well aligned to that, that really removes the subjectivity. And Miles says, I think that effort, attendance, attitude are not language, and so not part of evaluation of language. They are important, but not language. I would agree with that, but I can see the Brown and Abewick-Rama point that if you include those in a small percentage point, they can make a difference between, let's say, a grade if you're giving grades. So it might make a difference between, let's say, if a student has basically achieved the standard, but you're not really sure whether or not they should move to the next class. If you see they're putting in a lot of effort and their attendance is really good and those kind of things, that might tell you that they're ready for the next class. That's my opinion on that. And I see Martha, I think she agrees with that. Attendance and effort can be used to decide if a student remains in the program, but not used for actual level student achieves to determine the next level. Okay, I've got a long comment here from Sabine. I know this is not a PBLA-focused presentation, but if we think about evaluation in this context, I think that we need to place more emphasis on what students are capable of at the end of a course when we try to determine whether to graduate to the next level. If assessments done at the beginning of a term count the same amount as ones that are done towards the end, we are not accurately evaluating how far the students have come. And thank you, Sabine, for that comment. And again, because this is not a PBLA-focused presentation, I will say that the PBLA leads really are going to come out with something to clarify those things for us. But I think, again, we do have the LINC standard, the CLB standard, so that is something that we can measure against. I think it's probably a little more clear for us in language.
Lisa, I think we lost you again. Can you guys let me eval off the audio? Well, while Lisa gets her audio going, come back in, why don't you guys keep the comments going? We're having a great discussion, and then she can come in and catch up and read what she's missed.
Okay, I'm actually back. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Louise had a great comment because she teaches in an international context, but the box is scrolling up and I can't see it. I'm going to see if I can get back to it now. Okay, so Louise says, I teach international students, so putting a mark on attendance participation is needed to encourage students, and I've lost the rest of it because my chat box just moved, needed to encourage students to take part in the class, which in most cases does lead to achievement. So again, this is where a particular program's context may have to take into account different factors. And so as long, I think, as it's clear to everyone what that mark means, that's, I think, what I'm looking at for evaluation. Measures to make, or ways to make sure that it's really clear what the mark means. And that's why, for me, I think basing it mostly on the standard, largely on the standard, if not completely, but allowing for a small amount of fuzzy factors is what I would suggest. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm reading one, so I'll read it out loud. Rita is talking to @dstory. You once mentioned that if a student is afraid to speak in front of the class, but is comfortable chatting with you outside the classroom, that should be observed, marked, and used in the overall evaluation. So @Sherry, here's the subjectivity, whole person being illustrated, use of language in the real world. So just to comment on that, that was our B, teachers' ongoing observations of students' language performance. And to me, I think, especially if those things are documented, that actually would be a valid part of seeing if the student meets the standard. Lisa, how much time do we have left for discussion?
We have about 15 minutes.
Okay. So I don't know if everyone wants to keep going on this. I can continue to read some comments and comment upon them myself. Okay, so Miles says, the question was, how do you evaluate language? Attendance, etc. are not part of that, but yes, may well be part of decision about advancement, and is also very important for real world, i.e. job success. So I think that there's a distinction being made here about the language standard, and then about the decision about advancement. And to be honest, that's where I see the line kind of lies as well, where those fuzzy factors can come in a small part. So I think I would agree with you, Miles. Okay, Rita says, Lisa, can you summarize your main points before the session is over? I believe I missed some points while checking for your handouts online. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so the main points that I was trying to make, which are here on this slide, are I wanted to make a distinction between assessment and evaluation. Because when I was looking at the literature, there really wasn't a clear distinction being made. That first slide that I had, sorry, I'm going to see if I can skip back to that slide here. This one here. These were all definitions of evaluation that I found in the literature when I was doing the research. So that's one of the main things that I wanted to do, was try to actually come up with a simple and clear definition of evaluation as separate from assessment, because I think that helps when you're trying to decide what to do. Is to actually define what it is that you're trying to do. So let me go back to my summary. So that was the main thing. The other thing that I really wanted to do with this presentation is to really put on the floor what factors that we consider in evaluation, because I think sometimes those factors are not really clearly laid out. People make decisions, but they don't necessarily communicate to the students exactly what those decisions are based on. And I know I myself have been in the situation in an academic program where I've gotten a mark, and I'm a good student, so I get good marks, but I don't actually know what factors went into that mark, and I don't know what weight went onto each factor. So let's say I get a 90%, good student that I am, I get 90%, and I'm very happy with that, but because of the kind of student that I am, I think to myself, well, why didn't I get 100%? What did I lose that 10% on? So those factors have not been made clear to me. And I think when teachers on their own have to evaluate, they may not have clearly laid out exactly what factors that they are making their decisions on, and also what weighting they're giving to those factors. So if you're telling a student, you need to stay in this program or stay in this level for longer, but you can't actually tell them why. You can't actually tell them what you based your decision on. I think that's difficult for the student. I think it's difficult for the program to have to defend. So that's what that's the second thing that I'd like to really put on the floor here, is that the factors that are being considered in evaluation have to be out there and have to be really clear. And then the last thing for me is that I really feel that the focus, especially in a program where there is a standard, that the focus should be on achievement. And the reason I think that is because if we have a mark, or if we have a result that is based on achievement, then everyone can understand it. So I could be in Nova Scotia or I could be in Vancouver, and that result would mean the same if we all know the standard that it's based on, and it's all, and that is the main thing that is being considered. So I hope that was a good enough summary. And Shauna just said, every school institution will have its own philosophy of what should be included in the final evaluation. I've worked at a place where participation was a huge part of the overall grade, and another place where we were not allowed to include participation. Part of the issue is adjusting to the institutional culture about student evaluation and progress. And I completely can see that, Shauna. And I guess the problem that I have with that is then you have a student who takes their mark or takes their result from one institution to another, and the meaning is different. So when I look at that student's mark in one institution, I know it includes participation, and in another, I don't know that it includes participation. So I think that's where I'm going with my research on evaluation. Okay, and let me just try to take a couple more. So this is at Martha, this is Jerry Russo, and at Martha. If assessments include content presented in class, then students might not perform as well. If skills alone are tested, then practice outside of class can make up for it. Oh, my comments excluded thoughts about funding and such. So I think that's in reference to an earlier comment that you made in the chat box. And Rita says, attendance and participation are not the same. Attending and moving around and working online are all part of the learning process. Okay. And Yvonne says, I think a mark based on achievement is easier to defend. I don't know whether instructors ever find that their evaluation is challenged. That's interesting, Yvonne, because I know I've certainly had students who would like more information about why an evaluation, why a particular result is given to them. And even in some cases challenging that. They feel that they are ready for the next level, and a teacher has said that they're not. And if there's not something specific to base that on, to point to, I think that can be difficult for the student to understand. Okay, so I got a message from Lisa saying about 5 more minutes. So maybe I'll just look at just 1 or 2 more comments. Louise says, I think at the higher levels, when you are teaching students to write in a certain genre, it is hard for them to learn this material outside of class time. And Martha follows up with, I find students don't practice outside of class time, no time. Okay. Okay. Looks like the comments have slowed down. So I'm wondering, Lisa, do we want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we should wrap it up at this point, but this was a great discussion. I encourage all of you to join the Realize group on Tutela to continue this discussion.